Welcome to this special edition of The Wrap. I'm WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie.
And I'm WRAL State Government Reporter Travis Sane.
We're coming to you this week with an extra episode, something we want to do from time to time to bring you some interviews with newsmakers and the people who make North Carolina politics work.
Yeah, this week we got the man himself, Gerry Cohen, unofficial historian of North Carolina politics, everybody's free election lawyer on Twitter, and the first call for many reporters, myself included. Anytime a question comes up in North Carolina politics that's complicated or requires deep historical knowledge of North Carolina law.
You are at the institutional memory of the North Carolina legislature, Gerry. We all know that. And there's just no one else who knows some of the things that you know. You're like a walking encyclopedia. And so, I think a lot of people who've been around the political world probably know of Gerry Cohen, but you may not know Gerry Cohen. So tell us a little bit about your family. You've been married for, 40 years now to Pam, your wife, Pamela Farmer Cohen. How many kids?
2. Aaron, who's a CPA, lives in Chapel Hill. Zachary, who lives in Raleigh. And our daughter-in-law, Casey, who's a second-year resident at UNC Hospitals, finished up med school at Chapel Hill a couple of years ago.
Congrats. So I saw that you went to Elton John's farewell show in Charlotte earlier this month. Is that right? How was that?
It was really a lot of fun. It was my second Elton John concert. The first one was I was with a couple of friends in Europe during college in '71, and we were wandering through the Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen, and there was a guy at a piano, and with a small crowd. Elton John was playing an outdoor concert. He wasn't a new artist. I think he had started in '68 or '69, but it was new to me.
Was he playing? I don't remember.
What's now his old favorites.
Exactly, right.
Still playing a lot of the same songs.
What kind of music do you like in general?
I like, the sort of pop music. I've always liked Elton John, maybe from having heard him play.
And you grew up in Connecticut.
Yes.
But you went to college, Chapel Hill.
Yes.
And then you stayed. So what was the connection? What made you move from Connecticut? And then why'd you stay?
Well, my father grew up in Hartford, and his father, I basically sent him to Carolina as an undergrad in 1941. I say sent. I think his attraction was his father was Frank Porter Graham, who's university president at the time. My father used to describe Dr. Frank as, quote unquote, godlike. And when it came time for me to go to college in '68, I had several different choices and wound up at Chapel Hill. So,
and you just loved it? You just stayed?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Undergrad, I did a year of grad school, and then I went to law school at Carolina and just stayed. When I was an undergrad, I don't think I was really planning to stay, but I don't really have any fixed idea what I was doing.
So talk about your service on the town council, or the Chapel Hill Town Council, wasn't it?
Yes, I served from '73 to '79. I was elected when I was a second-year law student. It was sort of, I'm not sure if a lark is the right way, but I wanted to have a forum to talk about things. I was really interested in public transit at the time as an undergraduate, and met Howard Lee, who was mayor and got the system started. I worked on the 1973 referendum campaign in Chapel Hill, and then ran for council right after that. And I had not expected to win. I saw the campaign as sort of a platform to talk about ideas.
Sure.
And then I woke up and
oops, you caught the car, right?
And then I was reelected in '77. And when I started working for the legislature in '77, I resigned in the middle of my second term in the town council because there wasn't enough hours in the day to commute from Chapel Hill and basically do 2 60-hour-a-week things.
And were you the youngest town council member in the city's history?
Certainly at the time, yes. Although Mark Chilton was elected 20 years later as a senior at Carolina. We've had a couple of other seniors. Ty Wynn, who's on the council now, was a senior. So at the time, I was the youngest at 23.
And you mentioned earlier that Governor Roy Cooper kind of gave you a little blast from the past. Tell us about that.
Yeah, when I retired at the legislature, and I knew him when I was just after law school, and he was an undergrad. But when I retired at the legislature in 2014, he gave me a flyer. He had apparently advanced an event on South Campus in Morrison Dorm. I did these town halls when I was on council and listening posts, and I would go to dorm social lounges and places in the community. And he gave me a picture of a flyer that he hand lettered to put up around South Campus. It said, "Come see Gerry Cohen talk about," guess what, election law and students. And this was September of '78. And I had long since forgotten that, but he had held on to the flyer for 40 years and then gave it to me.
Wow. So how many years were you working at the legislature?
Started in '77 and retired in 2014. I haven't been back in a couple of years, but I started hanging out when I was in grad school in 1971.
Why?
So
Just like, why?
I was fascinated with the political process in government. When I was in high school, I got my congressman to send me a subscription to the Congressional Record, and I used to read congressional proceedings. I don't know whether it was an obsession, but it wound up leading into a career. So you never know where you're going from until you get started.
Yeah, and for our listeners who may not know, Gerry spent 37 years at the legislature.
Yes.
Most of that as director of legislative drafting. That means he wrote the laws. He took the ideas lawmakers brought to Raleigh, set them down into binding legal language, legalese, for lack of a better term. You've also done some mediating. You've done a little bit of lobbying, but I think everybody knows you as a bill drafter, as someone who can be relied on to get things right and to remember things. You have this prodigious memory where you can just seem to recall laws, sometimes obscure state laws from decades. Where does that come from? Where does that memory come from? Is it photographic?
I think so, and sometimes it can be a blessing and a curse at the same time. But maybe it's a symptom of some sorting out on the spectrum there. But I memorized train timetables and all sorts of obscure stuff. But I was interested at the legislature and got hired originally to do election law and local government. And that was been one of my sort of fascinations is the election process. Even as in high school, I worked in a couple of political campaigns in Hartford.
In Hartford, Connecticut?
Yeah.
And that's where you grew up?
Yes.
Have you ever thought about going back?
I went back for my couple of high school reunions.
And that's it. Huh? Okay, that'll do. That's enough. So I want to go back to something that Travis was just talking about, your mediation work. And you said, so looking at your LinkedIn yesterday, the first thing you write describing yourself as a problem solver.
Yeah.
And the second thing is understands parties in a dispute. Why do you think that's so important to someone in your line of work?
Well, and working at the legislature, a lot of it was talking to members who had ideas. Now, as director of bill drafting, I supervised 10 or 11 attorneys and reviewed stuff, but I also drafted in a 2-year period, maybe 500 or 600 bills myself, and sitting down with members or sometimes groups and trying to do problem solving and solutions, understanding that not all problems have solutions, and sometimes people will look for solutions and they aren't actually problems at all. And trying to do that or sitting down with brainstorming, like I remember going into, this would have been about 1998 with, I think it was Senator Ellie Kinnaird and the late Martin Nesbitt, and they wanted to have ideas on how to improve turnout in elections, how to improve the election process. And I remember saying that, well, some state or other had something they called early voting, and I sort of explained what it was, and they said, well, draft something. And what I came up with, melding some different ideas, was what became our early voting process. I'm only taking credit for the beginning of it, not for where we are now.
Sure.
But it was sitting brainstorming on, how do you improve elections? So maybe people think it's not an improvement, but I do.
And it's really, it strikes me. One of my favorite things about you is above and beyond the fact that you remember what the laws are, you also remember like how these laws got this way.
Context.
Like why something may have been included or not included, or or who wanted them, or who the parties were in a particular dispute. And, a lot of times for those of us who are looking back 10, 20, 30 years at some of these laws, it is so valuable sometimes to understand the context that they came out of. And, how many laws do you think you've written personally?
Well, it's 600 times 18 cycles. I don't know, 10, 11,000. Of course, some of them were repeats because people would introduce the same thing year after year, but I'm not sure it was 10,000 different ideas. But.
Is that daunting at all, either because all right, this is going to be the law, or because someone says, well, we'll just write that down, and then, if I'm looking at a blank piece of paper, it can be daunting. I can only imagine what that's like when you're looking to set something into law.
Well, members would come in with ideas. Maybe it was why they ran for office. Maybe a constituent had an idea or an interest group, or they'd come in with a problem, and I'd work to help come up with a solution or find the people to help with the solution or involve people from an agency, in doing that. So I always enjoyed that process. It was tiring during the big part of the legislative session. It could easily be 60, 70 hours a week, between drafting and the budget and various other things. So
Sure.
That was tiring.
How often did legislators come to you with ideas that were just like flat out unconstitutional, things that you just could not do?
Occasionally, but I'm not a judge. I have no interest in being a judge. The job of legislative staff isn't to be judges. It's hopefully to give good advice to members about what the constitutional issues are. And if I gave a member an advice, which I would do, that this is unconstitutional, it was the member's decision whether to file it or not or push it or not. And many of them just fell by the wayside because everyone else realized it was unconstitutional. We also have courts to decide that. So, we have one of the predominant staff model in American legislatures is the nonpartisan central staff, where the staff serves members of both parties, both houses, and it's not our job to push our own ideas. So like I mentioned, the problem solving about early voting, people would ask, what are some potential policy solutions here? So I felt free to bring that up.
Sure.
You got any you wish you had back where maybe you thought it was bad law at the time, but it moved forward anyway, or now you look back at it and say, boy, I don't know that was the right way to go?
Well, there's a bunch of bad laws, but I can't pick out one, of the thousands of bills staff did each year. Only a few hundred would get enacted. Most of them were non-controversial. Most of the legislature's work, certainly 30 years ago, was local matters, local legislation, city charters, local election methods, etc.
And of course, now you're a member of the Wake County Board of Elections, another important job. And given that you were involved in the formation of early voting, what do you think of our laws, or do we have them? Is it easy enough to vote right now?
I think that with the three options people have, vote by mail, vote early in a 13 to 17 day period, depending on the county, or vote on election day, I think that there is ample choices for people to do it in a way that works for them. People need information. I'm not sure how anyone would know naturally what the methods are or how you do it, but I think that our election system in North Carolina is pretty good. I've been involved on the County Board of Elections, which currently has 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, in picking early voting sites, polling places, a lot of the nuts and bolts of elections, but almost every single decision our board has had has been unanimous. One of the Republican members was in my freshman dorm at Carolina, so I've known him for how many years is that? 54,
it's a small
53.
World.
So, you meet somebody, and even if you don't necessarily agree with them, you can have them as friends.
Well, absolutely. And, that's why I'm thinking, one of the things that's so just remarkable about you, to me, is that, you ran for office and then you went to work for the legislature for 37 years, I guess it is. And then after that, you decided to turn around and serve on the Wake County Board of Elections. Like, what motivates you to be that active in democracy?
Well, besides a fascination with the process, to make things work for people so people can have, for instance, on early voting, you try to work out a compromise with Wake County. Currently, we'll have 15 sites this year. Our county commissioners have been good on funding the election system in Wake County. 4 years ago, we only had 10 sites. So we've tried to increase opportunity and spread them all around the county. And our 5 members work together on coming up with staff on a list of the sites, and hopefully it's satisfactory to both parties and people in small towns and Raleigh and all around.
As a resident of Garner, I'd like to say thank you for getting
yes.
getting our early voting back.
Yes.
How many? One of the things that strikes me, that there's some election conspiracy theorists out there right now with I think pretty unreasonable concerns about the security of elections, and covering it. There are so many people involved in elections. I always think, well, these are your friends and neighbors. Give people an idea behind the scenes in Wake County. How many people are involved in pulling off an election? The logistics, the back end.
Well, I believe that for our 15 early voting sites, I may be off by a couple hundred. We may have, 1,200 people working at those sites. There's many of the days are 2 shifts. There's 17 consecutive days. We have 208 precincts. Many of them have 10 people staff. We may have 2,000 people working on election day. People have been very good in Wake County about volunteering. I mean, it's a paid job to work at your precinct polling place.
But very few people do it for the money.
It's still like volunteering. But
and then plus observers from the major parties.
Yes, and I've been a party observer in the past, so I've been in and viewed that process. I think observers are a good part of the process, so both parties and citizens feel confident about it. People can get over the top, though, and if somebody tries to intimidate somebody, then the site supervisor or chief judge at the polling place has the authority to eject them. But that's been few and far between where we've had any actual problems. At least in Wake County, the parties have been good about educating their observers on what they can do and not do.
I was going to say, talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen in the elections process, because, we were talking about conspiracy theories. We spend a lot of time in the media trying to debunk some of this stuff, pre-bunk it, just find a way to sort of tell people what's really going on. And, in your position, obviously, that's what you care about as well. And do you have concerns when you see some of the things that are going on?
Well, certainly here, no, I don't have concerns that there's any sort of fraud or anything like that. There are suggestions like, well, let's count ballots by hand. Well, I'm old enough that when I was an undergrad at Carolina, Orange County at the time had ballots, and this was true until 1986, actually, had paper ballots that were counted by hand, and I was a ballot counter several elections. And I remember one in 1972 in the presidential election, in that one precinct, there were probably 50 people counting ballots until 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. And if the counts didn't agree, you had to start over with a bunch. And it is not an ideal system. It certainly sounds good, but can you actually find the people to do this anymore?
And not to mention the fact the error rate for a machine is a lot lower than the error rate for a human.
Yes, and we do audits and checks. We audit a sample. Even if there's not a recount asked, we will audit and hand tally 3 precincts each election after the election under the supervision of the Board of Elections, and our meetings are public, and the absentee ballot counting and ballot opening and review are all done at public meetings. So
you've been, in addition to election logistics, a big supporter of public transit over the years. And I want to talk a little bit about that. You worked, as you said, on bus referendums back in Chapel Hill, I believe, in the 70s.
73, yes.
And then, are you disappointed that bus travel transit in general has not caught on in the Triangle like perhaps you hoped it would?
Well, I think that there is a very good level of service and ridership in most of our area transit systems. Right now, like with the public schools, there's shortage of drivers and various things for whatever causes, and services had to be cut back some. Even though the money was there, the people weren't. So, I worked a lot at the legislature on the mechanisms and the legislation on light rail, and I was very disappointed that project was sabotaged.
Yeah, the from Durham to Chapel Hill, that
Yes.
project. When you say sabotage, how do you tell our listeners more about that?
There were lots of lies from the NIMBY groups. I would have to be frank about that, and undercutting a lot of the stuff. It was very disappointing that Duke pulled the plug, university that is.
Basically, they said
at the
that
very last minute.
The train would mess with some sensitive equipment in their hospital there, which was not everybody agreed that was accurate. But that made the route difficult, at least from Duke's perspective.
Well, that's what they said. There's plenty of other transit systems and rail systems in North Carolina and around the world that have routes right to hospitals.
And through them.
I mean, I've taken the subway or light rail in Baltimore that runs right into Hopkins Hospital. I mean, right underground. I mean, so it's like, I don't know. I don't want to speak too badly because one of my part-time jobs is I'm on the faculty at Duke. I'm teaching a course on election law and election data,
of course,
starting in 2 weeks. This is my third year doing that, so I don't want to speak too harshly. But it was very disappointing when that project died. And now we're working on, commuter rail between Raleigh and Durham and bus rapid transit, several routes in Raleigh. And there's a lot of contention about all those issues, but transit was always an interest of mine.
All right, we're going to take a break there. When we come back, though, I want to talk more about trains because you've ridden the rails around this country, and I want to hear about it. We'll be right back, folks, with Gerry Cohen. All right, welcome back to this special edition of the Wrap. We're here with Gerry Cohen, and we were talking about transit before the break there, but I want to talk just about transit. You have ridden trains all over and across this country, am I correct?
Yeah, I've taken, my wife Pam and I have taken several transcontinental trips, Seattle, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, through Denver, the Southwest, Los Angeles, 2 different routes to Chicago, up and down the East Coast, Maine. I've always been sort of fascinated with train travel, where I view what I've done, though, and that is sort of a hobby. The trip is the destination.
Is that what you like about it, that the trip is the destination?
I've taken trains in Europe. I took a north-south train through Vietnam 20 years ago.
I'm a Facebook friend, and I just love to see the pictures that you post from some of these cars as you're coming, especially I think you did a coast to coast through the mountains.
Yes.
And
Glenwood Canyon, west of Denver.
Just amazing. You're like the best advertising for American train system that there is. Do you have frustration sometimes that we haven't seen more development of train rail? I mean, we've talked a little bit about light rail, but I'm talking about sort of commuter rail in the Triangle.
Well, I think that the first effort on that 15 years ago was unrealistic. There wasn't enough funding. Now, I think the funding is likely there. Congress has appropriated massive amounts of money for inter- and intra-city rail, so the funding may be there. If it's not, the project might not work. But that's something out there. The west side of Durham down to Garner or Clayton, depending on whether Johnston County is able to participate. There's probably funding for a 5th round trip, Raleigh-Charlotte on the Carolinian/Piedmont. That may start up in about a year to 18 months. So we'll have trains every 2 hours, basically, to Charlotte.
I mean, you've obviously been here for so long, and I think about all the changes I've seen here in the Triangle just since 2004 when I got here. I mean, just can you reflect a little bit on just how much this area has changed?
Well, I moved from Chapel Hill to Raleigh in '84, and I think Wake County's population has probably more than doubled. It's 1.1 or 1.2 million now, and maybe I may be wrong on this. Maybe it was 400,000 when I came here in '84, somewhere around there. So when I moved here, I think I knew all the names of the high schools, and now they're like triple the number as growth pressures. And I'll tell you one thing: I would never like to be on a school board, though.
That's a tough one.
It's funny to think that a school board would be more contentious than an elections board, and yet here we are.
So what's something about government that you wish people understood better? And then maybe what's something about government that is more complicated than it needs to be, and perhaps we can address.
Well, one of the big issues, is citizen participation. How are decisions made? That's a pretty contentious stuff in Raleigh right now. The legislature has moved and you can give the credit or blame for this to whoever you want, from October of odd year to November of even year, and it's likely based on other cities that have moved. North Carolina has 30 cities that will be voting this fall. The turnout is likely to be triple or more people voting for Raleigh office. I view that as positive.
Because municipalities used to vote in odd years, and a lot of them have moved to the even years with the presidential election or congressional elections.
Asheville, Winston-Salem, and Raleigh are the larger ones in even years now. Turnout, the electorate is very, very different. Electorate in a November even-numbered year has a lot more minorities, renters, etc. And in an October odd-year election, it tends to be a very different electorate. You can view that as positive or negative. One of the things, there was a lot of criticism, it'll get drowned out in a statewide election. Well, I see a lot more publicity right now for forums for Raleigh City Council than I do for anything for the legislature or judges or U.S. Senate. Frankly, there seems to be a lot of interest. Plus, school board is going on. The legislature moved the school board from the odd to even numbered years in 2014. So we've seen that, and turnout four times as many people have voted for school board than did when it was an odd year. So.
What offices have you run for? You brought in some old Cohen for Mayor buttons today.
Yeah, I was elected to the Chapel Hill Town Council in 73 and 77, and for some reason that I don't remember, I ran for mayor in 75 and 79, and I think in 75 I lost like 2-1, and 79 it was a 3-person race, and I think I finished third with 31% of the vote, which is hard to do, and I've written that off as something that was interesting to do, but
you were young though. You were in your 20s.
I ran for office 4 times while I was in my 20s. I've quit on that.
You got it out of your system.
I really enjoyed being on the town council in Chapel Hill. It was a fascinating experience. If I had to do it over again, I would have done it over again, but I just don't want to do any more of it.
That time in Chapel Hill, I think, was very formative for the state, and I'm judging that based on the fact that a lot of times a story will come up and one of the players, you'll say, oh, they lived in my dorm.
Right.
It just seems like a lot of people who are very involved in our politics right now were I guess living next door to you back in the 70s.
Well, it's quite common in a lot of states for people who get in political leadership to have gone to one of the larger state universities. And so, I don't think this is uncommon nationwide, but
sure.
Yes, I went to school with a lot of the folks, and even those at NC State are contemporaries of mine.
Who was the last governor that you didn't meet?
Oh, gosh. I'm not sure if I ever interacted with Jim Martin. Before that, it would have been, I think Dan Moore may have been governor when I was an undergrad. As a freshman, I did not meet him, but I've met all the governors since then.
You're a big sports fan too, right? Canes and Tar Heels, is that your two
right?
Big
well,
ones?
I grew up in Hartford, which is where the Whalers came from, although I had left Hartford as I had my family before the Whalers started playing. But it was still my hometown team. So when they came here, I got season tickets in 99, and I've had season tickets with a group. Right now I have 5 families sharing 4 seats, and I enjoy that. I think I'll be going to like 13 games this year. Tar Heel, Carolina, I have not been to many home games, basketball or football, maybe one a year at the most, because my time is really taken up here in Raleigh. I enjoy watching basketball. I have Final Four tickets for this coming year in Houston. I don't know if I'll go. It depends on who's playing. I won the I'm good at contests. I won the NCAA, when I say won, the ability to buy Final Four tickets. I got a note last week that I was one of the lucky several thousand people.
You're going to get a lot of calls. You realize that now that
right.
you said that.
When you say you're good at contests, you mean you're lucky or some sort of
That's
skill?
always been my fascination. Entering contests, I look for them with obscure rules that I can figure out. I've won over the years, and I've taken cash for all of this. I think I've won 3 cars.
Oh my gosh!
Yes, and it is like, there's a lot of them have obscure rules. I look for ones that are the most difficult to understand because and pour through all the rules. It's like analyzing legislation, reading rules of things.
Sure.
So that's
really
3
fascinating.
cars. What kind
I just
of cars?
took the cash for them. Oh, well, let's see. One time I entered a contest at Harris Teeter. I'm not sure what year this was, 1999. And I'd long since forgotten the contest. It was a drop box in Harris Teeter. And my son grabs me and says, there's somebody on the phone that said you want a Saturn. And I said, a Sega Saturn? You can have the game system. He says, no, not a Sega Saturn.
A Saturn car.
A Saturn car. Well, I found out from the dealer that almost no one takes the cars in these contests because they can't afford to pay the taxes on them, and they'll give you the cash for whatever the trade value is or something. So.
Interesting. I want to ask one last election question.
Sure, yes, please.
I listened to an interview you gave WUNC in 2017, and you were asked about judicial elections.
Yes.
And I think you said something along the lines of there are 21 district court judges, and in Wake County alone, and I, a 40-year attorney, know maybe 3 of them. So what chance does the average person... Should we be voting in judicial elections, do you think?
Well, I grew up in a state, Connecticut, that didn't have judicial elections. The governor nominated them, and they were confirmed or not by the legislature. That's the system I grew up in. And I think that now Wake County is now divided into 7 district court districts. So nobody sees 20 anymore like they used to up until 6 years ago. There's 3 or 4, but the ones in Wake County are all but 1 of the 18 or all but 2 are unopposed. And it's just filler on the ballot of unopposed people running for office. I don't know if it's a check. I don't know how people are going to know. In Mecklenburg, they're countywide. And
Right.
I guess people just take the lead of a political party, whether the elections are partisan or not, which is a bone of contention. The parties are still involved and have been in endorsing candidates. It was an odd system to me coming to North Carolina that people were asked to vote on judges with minimal information.
It's a lot to expect of people, really.
It is. Well, I mean, I want to ask your opinion then about having those partisan labels. I mean, one of the criticisms or praises that the legislature gets is for having put labels on a lot more elections, right? School boards, in some cases, made partisan, town councils, and of course, judicial elections. What are your thoughts? I mean, on one hand, as you say, more people vote. And they kind of know a little bit more about the judges than maybe they would. But what do you think about that effect on the races?
Well, I will tell you, having looked at the numbers, that when it was partisan and now that it's partisan again, what we call the roll-off or drop-off, where people stop voting on the ballot, it's now back to about 6 or 7% of the people who vote for president but don't vote for judge. When they were nonpartisan, it was 25, 30, 40%. People just left it blank. So people take cues from political parties. In Wake County, our school board is officially nonpartisan. Party labels don't appear on the ballot. From what I can tell, the mail that I get and stuff is that both parties appear to have endorsed candidates in some sort of formal process. It's just that when you come in to vote, you don't see that on the ballot.
I have to ask one last question here. What is the thing about behind the scenes at the legislature that people don't know, or most people don't know, let's say, that they should, or that you wish they did, or that they would be interested to know?
Certainly, when I was there was a lot of friendships between legislators, that it wasn't constant combat, that people, even though they may have disagreed on votes, people still got along. Now, whether that's still true, I haven't really been at the legislature much since 2017, so I don't know if that's still true. It seems to be nastier currently.
Less so. Yeah, I've heard that from legislators as well, that, there used to be more sort of across the aisle friendships and just sort of general camaraderie, and that the partisan environment that we're in has made that difficult.
Do you miss it? Do you miss being down there?
No. Doing something else now. I enjoyed doing it, but I don't want to do anymore. When I retired in 2014, I was offered a job doing some lobbying, which I did for 2 years and enjoyed that, but decided I don't want to continue that anymore. And, between teaching at Duke the last 3 years, so just one course a year, and being on the Board of Elections the last 3.5 years, and family and travel and stuff, it's plenty of time. I certainly did my time.
I was about to say, you've certainly done your bit of public service and then some. Well, Gerry, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. And honestly, I mean, I've just always looked up to you ever since I came here, as somebody who I could count on to give me the right answer, the correct answer, maybe a little bit more information than I asked.
Well, I will add one thing here.
Yes, please.
And feel free to cut it if you want, but if you're interested in this fall's election, check your voter registration. The regular voter registration deadline is 5 p.m. Friday, October 14th. There's a number of ways to register. It's also available. Registration is also available at early voting. Make sure that you participate in democracy. Those listening here.
Well, all the work you put into it, it seems like it'd be a shame not to. So,
amen to that.
All right. Well, this has been a podcast-only edition of the Wrap. There's no video on this particular NC Capital product, and there's no video on the page for this. So this is going to go out as podcast only. So if someone shared with you, please make sure you subscribe to our Wrap podcast.
Yeah, we want to do this a little more often, where we do a longer conversation and interview. So if you've got ideas, folks who are listening, of people in and around North Carolina politics you want to hear from, let us know. Reach out to Laura, reach out to myself. We're easy to find.
Thank you very much for listening.